My wife died on February 13th, 2024, holding my hand and whispering that she would see me on the other side. She was 62 years old. She had been a faithful member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for every single day of her life. She had served in the Bountiful Temple every Thursday morning for 11 years. She had been sealed to me in the Salt Lake Temple on June 8, 1991, by her own father, and she died believing with every cell in her body that our marriage would continue into the eternities. I never told her what I found. It was a Tuesday night in the middle of October, 4 months before she died. She was already sick by then, stage 4 pancreatic. 6 to 8 months, the doctor had said in September, and we were already burning through the first 2 of those months faster than I could make sense of. She had asked me, the day of the diagnosis, to finish a family history book she had been working on for almost a decade, a leather-bound volume about her ancestors going back to the earliest days of the church. She wanted it done for the grandchildren. She made me promise. So I was sitting at a card table in her home office at 11 o'clock at night while she slept down the hallway doing research for a chapter she had told me to start with. Her 4th great-grandmother, a woman named Nancy Marinda Johnson. I typed the name into the search bar of the official Joseph Smith Papers Project, the historical archive published by my own church, and I clicked the first result that came back. What I read on that screen between 11 o'clock and 2 in the morning is the reason I am sitting here tonight, 8 months after my wife's funeral, unable to pray, unable to sleep, and unable to stop thinking about the 4 months I spent lying to the woman I loved more than anyone in this world. My name is David Hollister. I am 58 years old. Returned missionary, Buenos Aires Mission. Former Bishop of the Bountiful North Ward, current High Counselor in the Bountiful North Stake, father of 4, Emma, Benjamin, Hannah, and Samuel, the youngest of whom was serving a mission in Lima, Peru, on the morning his mother was diagnosed and would not come home until 5 months after her funeral. This is the story of what was on that screen. It is the story of how I made the decision, alone at that card table at 2 in the morning, to let my wife die without ever knowing it. And it is the story of what happened 3 months after the funeral, when my daughter Hannah came home for Mother's Day weekend and made me finally clean out her mother's desk. Because what I found in the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet that Sunday afternoon is the part of this story I still cannot say out loud without my hands shaking, I'm going to start where it started. October 17th, 2023. The card table. The laptop. Her name was Nancy Marinda Johnson, and she had been dead for 138 years before she ended my faith. The exam room at Huntsman Cancer Institute had a window that looked east toward the mountains, and I remember thinking, the moment the oncologist closed the door behind her and sat down across from us, that it was a strange thing to give a room like this a view, as if anyone who got the news that was about to be given in this room would ever look out that window again and see anything except the moment they were sitting in right now. The oncologist was a young woman, maybe 35, kind eyes, dark hair pulled back, a small gold cross at her collarbone that I noticed and immediately filed away as something I would think about later. She had a folder in her hands, and she was holding it the way doctors hold folders when they already know what they have to say. She did not waste our time. She told us the scans had come back. She told us it was pancreatic. She told us it was stage 4. She told us 6 to 8 months, possibly less. And she told us there were treatments we could try, but she wanted us to be realistic about what realistic meant. Rachel reached over and took my hand. Her hand was warm. I remember being surprised by that, because in my imagination of this exact moment, the one I had been quietly rehearsing ever since her back pain started in July, her hand had always been cold. In reality, she squeezed my fingers and turned to the doctor and asked very calmly whether the treatment schedule would interfere with her temple shifts on Thursdays. I want you to hold on to that. The woman had just been told she would be dead before the next general conference, and her first question was about whether she could still serve in the house of the Lord. Because everything I am about to tell you only makes sense if you understand that this was not an ordinary Mormon woman. This was the finished product. This was what 30 years of Relief Society lessons and young women values and temple covenants builds, when it works exactly the way it is supposed to work. Rachel Whitmer was born in Logan, Utah in 1961. Her father was a stake president. Her mother taught early morning seminary for 22 years. Her sixth great-grandfather was one of the 8 witnesses of the Book of Mormon, and she could recite the testimony of the witnesses from memory the way other children recite the Pledge of Allegiance. She served a mission in Frankfurt, Germany. She came home in 1989. She met me 2 weeks later at a singles ward activity in Provo. And 6 months after that we were kneeling across an altar in the Salt Lake Temple with her father watching from the sealer's chair and her mother crying into a handkerchief in the second row. We had 4 children. Emma first in 1993, now sealed in the Rexburg Temple with 3 children of her own. Benjamin in 1995, serving as bishop of a young single adult ward at the age of 32. Hannah in 1998, studying elementary education at Brigham Young University, and Samuel, our youngest, born in 2004, serving a mission in Lima, Peru. Samuel had been in the field for 7 months on the day his mother was diagnosed. We made the call to his mission president that same afternoon from the parking lot of the Huntsman Cancer Institute, and Rachel told him she did not want her son brought home. She said she would rather die knowing her youngest had finished the work than live another 6 months with him sitting next to her bed in Bountiful, watching her fade. That was the kind of woman she was, the kind of woman who, 20 minutes after being handed a death sentence, was already organizing the time she had left around what the church needed from her. On the drive home that afternoon, we did not talk about the cancer. We talked about Samuel. We talked about the grandchildren. We talked about the new family in our ward who had just moved in from Idaho, and whether the Relief Society had taken them dinner yet. And then, just before we pulled into the driveway of the house we had lived in for 26 years, Rachel turned to me in the passenger seat and asked me to do one thing for her. She asked me to finish the family history book. I knew the book she meant. The leather-bound volume on the shelf in her office. The Whitmer line going back to Fayette, New York, full of photographs and scanned letters and stories pulled from old missionary journals. She had wanted it finished before the first grandchild learned to read. She had not made it. The cancer had caught her with the book still half done, and she wanted me to see it through, for the grandchildren, for Samuel when he came home from Peru. For the generations that would come after all of us. I promised her I would finish it. I want you to understand something. I had no idea what I was promising. I thought I was promising to paste some photographs and type some captions. I thought I was promising to finish a craft project for a dying woman. I thought it would take me a weekend, maybe 2. The hardest part, I figured, would be learning how to operate the scanner in her office. Rachel handed me the thread that unraveled everything she believed. She handed it to me with a smile in the passenger seat of our car, in the driveway of the only house our children had ever known, on the afternoon of the worst day of her life, and she thought she was asking me for a gift. I started on the book the second week of October. I set up a card table in her office next to her desk so that she could lie on the love seat under a quilt her own mother had made and watch me work. She liked having me in the room. She said it made her feel like she was still doing the project with me, even on the days when the nausea was so bad she could not sit up. She told me to start with a woman named Nancy Marinda Johnson. Nancy was Rachel's 4th great-grandmother on her mother's side. Born in Pomfret, Vermont in 1815. Joined the church in Kirtland, Ohio in the early 1830s. Rachel had a reproduction of a sepia photograph of her, made from an old daguerreotype in the church history library. a stern woman in a high collar with her hair parted severely down the middle. Rachel loved this photograph. She used to say that Nancy looked exactly like her own grandmother Whitmer, and she had built an entire chapter of the book around her. The chapter was titled A Daughter of the Restoration, and it was going to open with Nancy's baptism in an Ohio creek and close with her burial in the Salt Lake City Cemetery in 1886. I needed more material for the chapter. Rachel had left me a list of sources to check, and the Joseph Smith Papers project was at the top of the list. She had mentioned once that Nancy appeared in some of the early Kirtland documents, and she had always wanted to track down the references, but had never found the time. So, on October 17th, 2023, a Tuesday night, after Rachel had gone to bed early, because the chemo had been brutal that day, I sat down at the card table in her office with my laptop, and I typed Nancy Marinda Johnson into the search bar on the Joseph Smith Papers website. The first result that came back was a record of a sealing performed in Nauvoo, Illinois, on April 7, 1842. The sealing was between Nancy Marinda Johnson and Joseph Smith, Jr. Her name was listed among his plural wives. I thought it was a mistake. I thought it had to be a different Nancy. I opened a second tab and cross-referenced the birth date, the birthplace, the parents. It was the same woman. It was Rachel's fourth great-grandmother. She'd been sealed to Joseph Smith as a plural wife in April of 1842. And then I noticed the second thing. In April of 1842, Nancy Marinda Johnson was already married. She had been married since 1834 to a man named Orson Hyde, an apostle in the early church. Orson Hyde was not dead. He was not divorced from her. He was, at the exact moment of that sealing, serving a mission in Jerusalem, dedicating the Holy Land for the gathering of Israel. While he was gone, while he was thousands of miles away doing what he believed was the work of God, that same God's prophet was being sealed to his wife. I read the footnote 3 times. I clicked through to the source. The source linked to an essay published on the official website of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints under the title Plural Marriage in Kirtland and Nauvoo. I had never heard of this essay in my life. I had been a bishop. I had served on a high council. I had sat through thousands of hours of church meetings, and nobody had ever mentioned the existence of an essay on the official website of my own church admitting that the founder of my faith had been sealed to other men's living wives. I opened the essay. I read it at the card table in my dying wife's office at 11 o'clock at night, and I learned for the first time in 57 years that Joseph Smith had been sealed to somewhere between 30 and 40 women. That some of them had been as young as 14, that at least a dozen of them had been, like Nancy, married to other living men at the time of the sealing, that the doctrine taught to these women, when they hesitated, was that an angel with a drawn sword had commanded Joseph to take them, and that refusing him would mean the destruction of their own eternal families. I did not cry. I did not move. I sat there at the card table and I read the essay from beginning to end, and then I read it again. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, in the silence of a house where the only sound was the soft rattle of my wife's breathing down the hallway, I understood that the church I had given my entire adult life to was not the church I had thought I belonged to. I closed the laptop. I walked down the hallway. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom in the dark, and I looked at my wife. She was 62 pounds lighter than she had been in July. She was bald from the chemotherapy. Her temple garments were folded on the chair by the window because she had been too weak to put them back on after her shower. Her little blue Book of Mormon, the one she had carried in Frankfurt on her mission, was on the bedside table next to her reading glasses. I thought, if we had been born in 1842, they would have told her the same thing. They would have stood in this bedroom and they would have told my wife that an angel with a flaming sword had commanded her to leave me. And she would have done it. Because she believed. Because her belief was the deepest thing about her. I went back to her office and I read until the sun came up. The next 2 weeks, I did not sleep more than 3 hours a night. Rachel thought I was worried about her. I was worried about her. But mostly I was reading. I kept cross-referencing everything against the church's own sources. I am an engineer. I do not trust hostile websites. I went to the Joseph Smith papers, published by the Church Historians Press. I went to the Gospel Topics essays on the church's own website. I went to BYU Studies, and what I found again and again was that the version of the story I had been taught from primary onward was not the version the church itself was willing to defend in writing anymore. The translation of the Book of Mormon, the multiple accounts of the first vision, the Book of Abraham and the papyri that had been recovered in 1966, every thread I pulled came loose in my hand. I went through every stage. Denial first. There had to be context. There had to be an explanation. Then anger. Why had no one told me? Why had I spent 32 years teaching my own children a version of the story that the church itself had stopped defending? Then bargaining. Maybe the spiritual witness was still real even if the history was not. Maybe I could compartmentalize. Maybe I could be like the people I'd heard about who said they no longer believed the history but still loved the community. And then, one Thursday night at the end of October, I sat at the card table in Rachel's office and I looked at the sepia photograph of Nancy Miranda Johnson that Rachel had taped to the wall above her desk, and I understood that I could not compartmentalize because Rachel was down the hallway dying. And Rachel believed, with every cell in her body, that the man who had been sealed to Nancy Miranda Johnson, while Orson Hyde was in Jerusalem, was a prophet of God. And Rachel believed that her own sealing to me, performed by her own father in the Salt Lake Temple on June 8, 1991, was valid because it had been performed under the authority restored through that same man. If I told her what I had found, I would not just be telling her the church was not true. I would be telling her that her own marriage, her own eternal family, the one thing that was keeping her alive right now, was built on the same foundation as a sealing performed on a woman whose husband was out of the country, dedicating the Holy Land. I could not do it. I could not take that from her, not while she was dying. Not when the only thing getting her out of bed in the morning was the belief that she was going to see her own father again on the other side, and that our family would be together forever in the celestial kingdom. So I made the decision. I sat at the card table at 2 a.m, and I said out loud to the empty room, I am not going to tell her. I am going to let her die believing, and I am going to carry this alone. I thought I was being merciful. I thought I was being strong. I was about to find out what carrying it alone actually meant. I want to describe 4 moments to you. These are the ones I replay at 3 a.m. when I cannot sleep. The first was a sacrament meeting on the first Sunday of November. The bishop had called me 2 weeks earlier and asked me to give a talk on faith in trials. He said he thought I had something to offer the ward, given what Rachel and I were going through. I could not say no without explaining why, and I could not explain why, so I said yes. I stood at the pulpit on November 5, 2023, in front of 250 members of the Bountiful North Ward, and I gave a 12-minute talk on holding fast to the iron rod when the mists of darkness come upon us. I quoted Nephi. I quoted President Nelson. I saw Rachel in the 3rd row, in her wheelchair because she was too weak to walk that day, crying. She told me afterward it was the best talk I had ever given. I went home and I threw up in the guest bathroom where she could not hear me. The second was a Temple Recommend interview with our stake president on November 18th. Rachel had asked me to do some proxy ordinances for her ancestors in the Bountiful Temple, and she wanted the work done before she died. To do the ordinances, I had to renew my Temple Recommend. The interview was in the stake president's office on a Saturday morning. He asked me the 15 questions. Do you have a testimony of the restoration of the gospel in these, the latter days? Do you sustain the President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a prophet, seer, and revelator, and as the only person on earth authorized to exercise all priesthood keys? I said yes to all 15 questions. I looked him in the eye and I said yes. He signed the recommend. He told me Rachel was lucky to have me. I went home and I did the ordinances she had asked for, and I stood in the celestial room of the bountiful temple in white clothing, and I felt nothing at all. The third was a phone call with Samuel in December. He called from Lima on a Sunday night, which was the one day his mission president let him call home during his mother's illness. He was crying. He had just gotten off the phone with his companion's mother, and something she had said about eternal families had hit him hard. He asked me, through the tears, to promise him that the family would be together forever. He said, "Dad, I need to hear you say it. Promise me Mom is going to be there when I get home from the other side. Promise me the ceiling is real." I sat on the edge of our bed with the phone against my ear, and I looked at Rachel sleeping next to me, and I said, "I promise, Sammy. I promise the ceiling is real. I promise we are going to be a family forever." He said, "Thank you, Dad." He said, "I love you, Dad." He hung up. I sat on the edge of that bed for 20 minutes before I could move. The 4th was in early January, about 5 weeks before she died. Rachel had a bad night. The pain was worse than usual, and the morphine was not touching it, and she was scared. She asked me to get into the bed next to her and hold her. I did. She asked me to tell her the story of our ceiling. She said she wanted to hear it the way I remembered it, so I told her. I told her about the morning of June 8th, 1991. I told her about the drive up from Provo in my father's Buick with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I told her about seeing her in the bride's room in her white dress. I told her about kneeling across the altar and looking into the mirrors on both walls and seeing our reflections repeating into infinity, the way the sealer told us was a symbol of eternity. I told her about her father pronouncing us husband and wife for time and all eternity by the authority of the holy priesthood restored through the prophet Joseph Smith. She was crying by the end. She said, "David, that is the best day of my whole life. That is the day I'm going to think about when I go. Promise me you will think about it too on the other side. Promise me you will remember." I promised her I would remember, and I meant it. But what I could not say was that I no longer believed the authority that ceremony had been performed under was what we had both been told it was. I lay there in the dark next to my dying wife, and I held her while she cried about the happiest day of her life, and I carried my secret like a stone in my chest, and I did not say a word. She died on a Tuesday morning, February 13th, 2024. The sun was coming through the east-facing window of our bedroom, and she had asked me the night before to open the curtains all the way so she could see the mountains when she woke up. She woke up at 6. She could not speak much by then. She squeezed my hand. She said, "Until the other side." I said, "Until the other side." She closed her eyes. The hospice nurse came in at 7 and told me she was gone. I called the children. Emma drove down from Rexburg with her husband and their 3 kids. Benjamin came from his ward boundary on the east side of Salt Lake, still in his Sunday suit, because he had been setting up for an early morning leadership meeting when he got my call. Hannah flew in from Provo by the afternoon. Samuel, we could not bring home. The mission president called him into the office in Lima and told him, and Samuel asked to stay and finish his mission the way his mother had wanted. He would not be home for another 5 months. The funeral was on Saturday, February 17th, in the chapel of the bountiful North Ward building. Benjamin presided. He is a bishop, and he wanted to do it for his mother, and I did not have the heart to tell him that his father was sitting in the front row, hollowed out by something that had nothing to do with grief. Emma spoke. Hannah spoke. Samuel spoke by speakerphone from the mission office in Lima. his voice crackling through the ward speakers while 400 people in the chapel wept. The bishop spoke. The stake president spoke. Every single one of them testified that Rachel was now on the other side of the veil, doing missionary work among her ancestors, waiting for the day when our family would be reunited in the celestial kingdom. Every single one of them meant it. Every single one of them loved her. I sat in the front row and I listened to them, and I could not cry and I could not pray. I understood that I was going to have to carry this secret for the rest of my life, alone, with no one in the world I could tell. That is what I thought, sitting in that front row on February 17th, 2024, that I was alone, that I had been alone in it for 4 months, that I was going to be alone in it forever. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about almost everything, but I did not find out until 3 months later, on Mother's Day weekend, when my daughter Hannah came home from Provo and made me finally open the door to her mother's office. I had not gone into that office since the funeral. I could not. I could go into the kitchen, the bedroom, the dinner table on Sunday afternoons when Emma brought the grandchildren over. But every time I stood in front of the office door, I felt the weight of the card table and the laptop and the sepia photograph of Nancy Marinda Johnson, and I walked away. Hannah came home for Mother's Day weekend in May. She asked me very gently whether I was ready to start going through her mother's things. The family history library at the Stake Center had called. They wanted to know if we were going to donate the genealogy files. She said she could help me. She said we could do it together. So on the Saturday of Mother's Day weekend 2024, Hannah and I opened the door to her mother's office, and we started going through the drawers. Most of it was easy. Scanned photographs, family group sheets, folders full of pedigree charts, things for the library, things for the grandchildren, things to throw away. Hannah worked on the desk. I worked on the filing cabinet along the far wall. We did not talk much. It was the kind of work you do quietly. I was on the last drawer, the bottom drawer of the file cabinet, when I found it. Underneath 3 scrapbook folders and a Ziploc bag of old Temple Recommends Rachel had kept for reasons I still do not understand, there was a black moleskin notebook. No name on the cover, no label. I pulled it out and I opened it because I thought it was blank. I was going to toss it in the donate pile because the Stake Family History Library was always short on blank journals for the youth program. It was not blank. It was full of my wife's handwriting. The first page had a date at the top, written in her blue felt-tip pen. March 14th, 2019, 4.5 years before her diagnosis. And underneath the date, in the same handwriting she used to write birthday cards to our children, were these words. Today, I read something I cannot unread. I have to write it somewhere because I cannot tell David. He loves the church more than anything in this world, and I will take this to the grave before I take it from him. I sat in her chair. I did not move for a long time. Hannah came back into the office a few minutes later with a cup of tea for me. She saw my face. She asked what was wrong. I told her I was tired and I wanted to finish the rest on my own tomorrow. She kissed me on the forehead and she left. I locked the office door behind her, and I opened the notebook again, and I read it from the first page to the last. 80 pages. 80 pages in her blue felt-tip pen, stretching from March 2019 to January 2024. 4.5 years of a secret my wife had been keeping from me in the same house I had been sleeping in, at the same desk I had been sitting at, in the same office where I had made my own discovery 4 months before she died. She had found it first. Rachel had found it first. The earliest entries were short, half a page at a time. March of 2019, she did not say what she had been reading, but whatever it was had made her question the account of the Book of Mormon translation she had been taught her whole life. April, she mentioned the hat and the stone for the first time. May, Fanny Alger. June, the Book of Abraham. By September of 2019, 6 months in, she had worked her way through every one of the Gospel Topics essays on the church's website, the same essays I would not find for another 4 years. The middle entries got longer. She wrote about sitting in Relief Society lessons and biting the inside of her cheek. She wrote about bearing her testimony on Fast Sunday and feeling like she was lying to her own children. She wrote about the Thursday mornings at the Bountiful Temple and how she had almost given up her calling twice, but had not been able to because she could not think of a way to explain it to me. There was an entry from November of 2021. It said, "David got released from the bishopric today. I watched him in the chapel when the stake president announced it, and I saw the look on his face. He looked like a man whose best friend had moved away. I cannot do this to him. I would rather carry it alone for the rest of my life." There was an entry from March of 2023, 6 months before her diagnosis, that said, "I had a thought today that scared me. I thought, maybe I will get sick before he does. Maybe I will die first, and then it will not matter because he will never have to know. And I hated myself for thinking it, but I thought it." And then the last entry, dated January 26, 2024, 18 days before she died. It said, "I think David has found it. He is different. He is too gentle with me. He reads me the scriptures the way you read a story to a child. I think he knows. I think he has been protecting me the same way I have been protecting him. I do not know whether to feel grief or relief. I cannot ask him. If I am wrong, I will destroy him. If I am right and we say it out loud, I do not know what is left of our marriage after that. So I am going to take it to the grave. I think he is too. I think that is the love story. Two people carrying the same thing, from opposite sides of the same bed, until the end." I closed the notebook at 1 in the morning on Mother's Day. I put my head down on her desk, and I cried for the first time since she had died 3 months earlier. I cried for her, and I cried for me, and I cried for the 5 years we had spent in the same house with the same secret, and I cried because the last 18 days of our marriage had been the only 18 days where we had both been on the same side of the glass, and neither of us had known it, and we had not said a single word to each other about the one thing that mattered most to both of us. I am telling you this story from the same office. I am sitting at the same desk. The black moleskin is on the corner next to me. The sepia photograph of Nancy Marinda Johnson is still taped to the wall. The family history book is still unfinished, and I do not know if I am going to finish it. Samuel came home from Lima in July. He does not know any of this yet. He is the reason I have not made any decisions. He is the reason I still go to church on Sundays, and I still sit in the high council seats, and I still stand up when they sing the hymns. Because my youngest son served 2 years in Peru for a church his father no longer believes in, and his mother did not believe in either, and I do not yet know how to tell him that the family he was sealed to on June 8, 1991, is not the family he thought it was. I will tell him. I think I will tell him soon, but I am not telling him tonight. Tonight, I am telling you. People ask me, the few people I have told, whether I still believe in God, whether I still hold a temple recommend, whether I am going to leave the church. I am not going to answer those questions tonight, not because I am hiding, because those questions are about me, and this story is not about me. This story is about the fact that I spent my entire adult life in a church that taught me the most important thing a husband and wife could ever build was eternal honesty. And I spent the last 4 months of my wife's life lying to her. And she spent the last 5 years of her life lying to me, and we did it because we loved each other, and because the institution we had given our lives to had not given us any language we could have used to tell each other the truth. There is one sentence in her notebook I come back to more than any other. It is from an entry in August of 2020, during the pandemic, when the temples were closed, and I remember she was so sad, and I thought it was the lockdown. She wrote, "The worst thing is not what the church teaches. It is what the church makes impossible to say out loud to the person sleeping next to you. That is the sentence I want you to take with you tonight." I was sealed to Rachel in the Salt Lake Temple on June 8, 1991. I understand now that we did not actually become husband and wife until 3 months after she died. When I sat in this chair and I read her handwriting, and I finally heard what she had been trying to tell me for 5 years. We only became husband and wife the night I finished that notebook, and by then she was gone. If this story meant something to you, if any part of it sounded like a room in your own house, I am asking you for 2 things. Leave a comment and tell me what you would have done in my place. Would you have told her? Would you have let her die believing? There is no right answer. I am not looking for one. I'm looking to know I am not the only person still trying to figure it out. And if you know someone who is carrying this kind of weight in silence, a husband, a wife, a brother, a sister, anyone who is sitting across a dinner table from the person they love most in the world and not saying the one thing they most need to say, please send them this video. You do not have to say anything. Just send it. Sometimes the only thing that breaks a silence like this is knowing that someone else has already broken it first. Subscribe if you want to hear what I'm going to tell Samuel when he gets back from the mission reunion next month. I'm going to tell it here. I have not told it to anyone else yet. I do not know where else to put it. Thank you for listening to me tonight. Thank you for listening to her.